Hey everybody, this is Dillard-Huffman, your candidate for District 8, and we're going live from the Essex Library. We are here with my good old buddy and my idol. She is running for state's attorney, and her name is Sarah David. Sarah David is someone that I want to have a discussion with as I seek the council seat. One of my biggest issues is having a seat at the table. Just last month was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I wanted to touch base with someone who works in law enforcement, and she's also running for, again, Baltimore County State's Attorney, about some of the best ways to make this a more safe and a better place for women who may be facing domestic violence issues to live. Okay, so I want you to introduce yourself, Sarah, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Oh, thanks, Sharonda. It's good to be here with you. It's good to be here in Essex. So hi everyone, I'm Sarah David. I'm running for state's attorney in Baltimore County. I grew up in Baltimore County in Pikesville, and then I went to Johns Hopkins University and I studied political science and Arabic. I moved to Cairo and then to Morocco, and then came back to the US to work for the NYPD in their counterterrorism division. And then I came back here to Maryland for law school and went to work for the Maryland legislature. And now I do political corruption and police misconduct prosecutions. I do that all over the state of Maryland. And I'm running for state's attorney to make Baltimore County safer. So the goal is to have a safer Baltimore County with Sarah, and I'm glad to be here to answer questions.
Okay, but let me tell you this. I'm going to say some things that Sharonda's saying, but Sarah's not going to say it, okay? Because she's not talking about specific cases, but Sharonda will. So I'm all about elevating our new District 8, okay? And so let me just talk about you deal with police corruption and things of that nature. And I've even worked with the city and some of their consent decree issues. So for you, let's just look at domestic violence issues. How can we as women empower women to get the resources they need, and how, if you get into office, we can do a better job?
So this is a really important and personal issue to me. I do a lot of work in the nonprofit space.
Talk to them.
Oh, sorry.
Talk to them.
Okay.
Talk to them. You ain't got to talk to me.
I do a lot of work in the nonprofit space as it relates to domestic violence, as well as sort of, professional work. And I think that the challenge is we want to make sure that victims of domestic violence have services, whether or not they're comfortable pursuing a prosecution. And I want to be clear that a lot of times victims of domestic violence don't want to go through the trial process because of the added trauma the trial process brings, but also because they're afraid they'll lose their children, they're afraid they'll lose their house. There are other collateral consequences. We just had the news about ICE in Baltimore County. A lot of domestic violence victims face significant concerns about immigration and other types of things. And so what we need to do as a state's attorney's office is educate people about what resources are available to them, not just in the lane of prosecution, but also in the lane of all of these other things. We have some great organizations here in Baltimore County that do fantastic work in the domestic violence space, and we should be connecting victims to those resources. I'll note also that people who are not necessarily citizens of the United States who experience violence and domestic violence have an 80% higher fatality rate, 80% higher than everybody else. And I think that what's really important for the state's attorney's office is to make sure that people understand that if they cooperate in a criminal investigation, or that they're a victim and they come forward, that they can pursue what's called a U visa. And a lot of other jurisdictions educate people about this, and we need to be doing that here, especially given the federal climate.
I have no idea what a U visa is. Can you tell me?
So a U visa is a process that's granted to people that cooperate when it comes to criminal prosecutions if they're not a citizen. And so the reason this is so important is that actually people from all sides of the political aisle support this process. And the reason is because we want people who commit crimes to be held accountable. And if the witness to those crimes is a person that isn't a citizen of this country, we still want that person to testify so that we can get that conviction. If that person is a victim and they're being hurt by somebody, we want that person to testify so we can can get that conviction. And so it's a process that people can go through to get what's called it's a U visa, it's a special visa that's granted by state's attorneys to people who cooperate. And it's a really important program to educate people about so that they know that there are resources if they come forward.
I had no idea. I had another question. So there is Clyde. He actually lives in the area. He is talking about like revitalizing how the sheriff department operates. Now, because Baltimore County is the largest jurisdiction, we have both a Baltimore County police, and we also everybody has a sheriff's department. How do you feel about maybe allocating or having something to allocate some of the domestic violence calls to our sheriff's department, because they primarily deal with a lot of evictions and, manning our courts and things like that?
So I think it's important that we retain the jurisdictions of the separate departments, right? I think it's important. We have a lot of really good police programs in Baltimore County that are doing a good job educating in the community. It's the state's attorney's office that doesn't really have the community engagement arm that it needs to. And so that's really where we need to improve. One of the things, though, that the sheriff's office does that we can all kind of work together on is serve protective orders. So when you go to court and you get a protective order, it's the sheriff's office that serves that protective order. Actually, this is a very dangerous thing that the sheriff's office does, because serving a protective order can be something that escalates somebody who's already, engaged in sort of violent behavior. And so that's a real space where we need to be collaborative about how to make sure those orders are served both quickly, because the speed at which they're served is very important, but also in a way that's safe for our sheriffs. And so that's a space definitely that we would look at in working with the sheriff's office.
I just want to say I have no law degree, but I work in many different law departments and even in general counsel offices. So because I have friends who have actually worked in a state's attorney, or a friend that works in a state's attorney's office or has been a state's attorney, I guess I'm concerned about these lists that come out. Because when I look at other jurisdictions, they have a do not call list. But I think, to me, as a person who has experienced discrimination in the workplace, I found out, let me tell you this, I found out that I was on some secret list with the Board of Elections. You know what happened? Because, I read all the books, I know the rules, and I actually saw some of my neighbors kind of telling people how to vote, like giving like context clues, because they don't know who people are. And I snitched. That's what I do. I called the Board of Elections. And I was like, oh, no. And these people, unfortunately, they probably had alcohol problem. They smelled like they were drinking. And some of them are volunteers. They're volunteering. And, they're not necessarily have to sign these papers and you can get fired from your job. It's a 1-2 thing. And there was an investigation. And it's only Sharonda against the whole family. And apparently I got put on a do not call list for the Board of Elections, right? And I didn't even know it till I tried to volunteer when I was working in the city of Baltimore. So when our police chief has a personnel record over an actual parking violation, is there something our state's attorney's office can do to have a real list for things that maybe the people, I don't know if anybody's going to say, you know what, you're not a good witness because back when you were 19, you did XYZ. Is there anything that the state's attorney's office can work with to possibly have a real list?
So let's talk about sort of what we need to do when it relates to police credibility and transparency. And let's start by saying that we're really lucky here in Baltimore County to have an excellent police chief who has worked for our department for over 40 years and has brought fantastic innovation to Baltimore County in the space of, where I really want to bring those to the state's attorney's office. He's already leading the way in the space of AI and cyber and really making those changes. And so I think that the challenge when it comes to, Baltimore County's been doing things the same way for too long. And the way that sort of these types of issues need to be handled is that, first of all, you always have to disclose something. And I'm not going to talk about any specific cases. I'm going to talk about in general, right? If a police officer has an issue in their past that relates to whether they tell the truth or not, that has to be disclosed to the defense, right? No question. So the first step is always the disclosure. The next step, though, is whether it comes into court, right? And you can litigate that. Now, if there is an officer, and that's important because, some officers do things that are maybe related to truth, but they're young, or it's something that happened a long time ago, or it's not really relevant to sort of the court proceedings. And that's something that we let a judge decide, right? That's how we do it. Now, if there are officers that are, so egregiously, have so egregiously broken moral codes of conduct, they should not be on the police force, right? This shouldn't be a question of, who are we calling if they're there? We should be, if this is something we can defend, we would defend it. And if it's something that the person shouldn't be able to testify in court trials, they shouldn't be a police officer. And that's how it works in most of the jurisdictions. And I think that Baltimore County needs to modernize that process. We shouldn't be putting our police officers who have, think about the ones who have unfounded charges. They've been adjudicated not guilty, right? They shouldn't be put in a position where they're not allowed to testify, right? Because they've been exonerated. I'm not going to comment on any other list.
Right.
But these are processes that we really need to modernize, and we need to make sure that the transparency is valued, and also that we're not taking police officers who are otherwise doing a great job and not bringing them to court, right?
I agree. Now, speaking of our police, now I see that there's like animosity sometimes between our state's attorney's office in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. Baltimore City and the mayor, right? So what are the best ways of communication of different legislators? The state's attorney is part of the judicial body, and the state's attorney is different than the executive and the legislative. Like, what can you bring to the table to try to, no matter who's in office, to have good communication?
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that the state's attorney needs to be a community partner to all of our legislators, to our county executive, and to all of our neighboring jurisdictions. One of the big things that I've emphasized in my campaign is also just how to be strategic regionally. Crime does not start and end at our borders, right? It's not as if you've now left Baltimore County, sorry, you're Harford County's problem, we have nothing to do with you anymore, or you're Anne Arundel County's problem, or you're Baltimore City's problem, right? We are all connected. And so the important thing is that we're working together to make sure that we have systems in place to address those crimes, especially the ones like elder fraud, cyber fraud, all of those things, certain harassment and stalking that takes place digitally. These things are not happening in one jurisdiction anymore. They're happening all around, and we need to make sure that we're addressing that reality and working together. So the state's attorney is also a really important leader in crime prevention if they choose to be. And that's not something we've really seen in Baltimore County, but it's something that I want to bring to Baltimore County. Focusing on crime prevention, addressing the underlying causes of crimes, working with people to prevent crimes from happening in the first place, with the business community, with community groups, with addiction mental health treatment, with all of these types of things, make sure that we can address the issues underlying crimes before they happen. And that's something where the state's attorney can make a really big difference.
Well, one of the biggest issues in my area is juvenile crime. So what are some of your ways that you think that it should be addressed? And I know it's a partnership and the state's attorney can't do everything, and a lot of it is based upon, some of the state juvenile justice. We have a new secretary. So you tell me what your ideas are.
So it's all about sort of those partnerships as well, and having a better relationship with those partners, making sure that we have a strong relationship with our legislative partners and our statewide partners. But it's also more than that. It's about having information. So especially in the area of juvenile justice, there are a lot of conversations around the issue and very little information. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that the state's attorney's office doesn't keep or publish any data related to juvenile crimes. It doesn't actually keep or publish any data related to any crimes. And the challenge is it's really hard to manage something that you can't measure. And so we hear a lot of stories and anecdotes here in Baltimore County about this happened and then nothing happened, there were no consequences, or this was very serious. And look, it's once someone is victimized, for whoever they're victimized by, there has to be accountability, right? But the prevention piece is key, especially when we're dealing with juveniles, and that comes through school partnerships and other types of things, right? And so the state's attorney needs to work with sort of both hands. They need to work with the prevention hand and the accountability hand, but we need to make sure we're doing it efficiently and effectively. And without data, we just don't know, and we should know in Baltimore County. So that's something that I'm going to change.
Well, I love it because my biggest problem is I have to ask for PI, Public Information Act requests, when stuff should just be available to us. Now, talking about your relationship with juvenile justice, do you think that in your view, I know a lot of times our state's attorneys go to Annapolis to enact change. Is there something that you would need for the council to do to make the state's attorney's job a little bit easier? Is there anything that you can think of, or is everything based on state law?
No, I think that there's a lot of things we could do in Baltimore County with the prevention piece, right? In partnering again with a lot of our local services. I think that that's going to be a really important conversation. I think we also need to have an honest conversation with the council about what our juvenile resources are. And again, the data will show this, right? But we need enough prosecutors who are specialized in juvenile, right? To be focused on how to address these issues in the prevention arm as well as in the accountability arm. And if we don't have those resources, I think sometimes people don't understand how limited juvenile resources are around the state. Baltimore City certainly has a more robust operation. They're one of the larger state's attorney's office. But you get into some of these smaller counties, they don't have a single juvenile prosecutor. And so we need to have, I mean, that's a partnership with making sure that we have strong education, that we have strong partnerships, that we make sure, again, that our neighboring jurisdictions and us are all working together to address these issues, because it's not hard to go from county to county, right? And so I think that the partnership with the council is really important once we get the data, because that's going to be how we get the resources to address the issues.
Awesome. Now, let me just tell you my experience. I worked with when I worked with the city of Baltimore, I was in the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and we did have a strong partnership with the state's attorney's office to do outreach and things like that. Do you think that's something that is being done now?
No, and that's a shame. And I think that that's the challenge, right? And I've, through this process, been at many community meetings and other things, and the state's attorney, him or herself, can't be the only person that's out there, right? We need our prosecutorial arm and our prosecutorial team to be engaged. And I think that and all of with our county resources. And, when I attend meetings, there's often representatives there from other resources in the county, including the police, but not from the state's attorney's office. And people really need that type of engagement also, because the state's attorney's office is going to be the touch point for the trial process if the person is a victim or a witness of a crime. And the sad thing about that is any one of us, any day, could become a victim or witness of a crime, right? Through no fault of our own. And I think that the challenge is, if you don't know anyone in the state's attorney's office, if they're not a space that you're comfortable with, if you haven't really engaged or met their victim witness coordinators and services, then that's a very intimidating space. But if it's people that you're familiar with in your community, much like sort of the police have done here in the county, it starts to become more comfortable. And I think that that's where we need to go. I think that's where all the other jurisdictions, to your point, the city and a lot of the others are going. And so it's time for us. It's time for us to move out from what we were doing 20 years ago and start looking at what we need to do today and tomorrow and 20 years from now.
Well, from my perspective, we are stuck in the 1900s with some of our computer systems. Can you talk about modernization of some of the systems they're using in the state's attorney's office? And, because I don't know about you, but I just feel like we might be a little bit behind.
Yeah, and I think it's not just that we're behind, it's that we're not forward thinking. Okay. And so one of the challenges isn't just what's accessible, right? It's about preparing for what's going to be. Let's talk about what is the elephant in the evidentiary and trial world, which is AI, right? Now all of a sudden you can be watching this video of me and I have a defense that it is not me, right? Somebody, Sharonda has made a digital image of Sarah David and she did not say these things and she did not do these things, and we have to combat that. Other government agencies have been working really hard to not only address the issues that AI brings as far as crimes, and so I've been leading in my professional space on some important legislation for election integrity and for identity fraud to protect us from artificial intelligence, but we also need to be embracing it as a tool, how it can help us sort through evidence, how it can help us make sure our discovery processes and what we're disclosing to the defense goes faster, cleaner, and is more accurate. How we can help our young prosecutors, especially in the courtroom, with AI being able to look up laws and statutes very quickly. This not only helps us be efficient, but it helps make sure we're getting things right. And I think that we, obviously, they can't do a lawyer's job. You can't use AI to write your motions. You can't use AI to write your briefs. But you can use it to speed up systems that are slow. And whether we are using it or not, we're going to be. And so I think we need someone forward thinking to say, this is what our crimes are going to look like. This is what our courtrooms are going to look like. And let's start preparing for it now because we can see that train coming.
Okay, I know you have your show on time. She's a busy woman. So my question is about the decriminalization of disability. So I have been working in disability space, and I have an adult son with disabilities. And my worst fear is something that recently happened in Kenwood High School. You know, I try to protect my son from negative interactions with the police because of his autism. He may not be able to communicate, and he's going to try to shake your hand. You tell him to put his hands up, you know. So, how will we in the future try to not have a situation where if someone does something and has a disability, where it's always criminalized?
I think one of the most important things that, you know, we've really worked on as a society, and again, that our state's attorney's office needs to catch up with, is exactly the issue that you're discussing, which is making sure we understand why people do the things they do, and how it's not necessarily them being what they used to be labeled, right? Like uncooperative or things like that. And, you know, you're talking about disabilities, and I don't want to detract from that because that's important, but it's true for lots of victims coming back full circle to domestic violence. A lot of times, you know, people in very dangerous situations will be scared, as I said, to go to trial, and they would be labeled uncooperative, right? But that's not what's happening. And the more we understand, whether it's survivors, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's people that have been grown up in societies that have very different experiences and trust with law enforcement, have grown up in different countries, and have very different experience and trust in law enforcement, linguistic skills, cultural skills, those are things that, you know, we should bring people to train on a consistent basis. And if somebody is acting in a way that is unusual or confusing, instead of the default, they're not cooperative, we should be thinking about what are our tools, right? And that's where our victim witness services is so important, right? Not every prosecutor is going to have, you know, that, you know, important skill set, but we certainly can make sure our victim witness advocates do. And that is a space in the state's attorney's office that we can really grow, that will help with a lot of the issues, because we would have someone there that specializes in people with disabilities or people from different countries, or has the ability to get linguistic resources. And if we have that, you know, we've really expanded our ability for accountability, because people who we were deeming uncooperative are important. They're victims, they're witnesses, they're other things that help make the rest of us safer if we can get accountability in those cases, and we're missing opportunities to do that now.
Now, I'm going to put Sarah on the spot, and I'm just going to be her last question. Okay, she's not going to answer it specifically, but I'm going to say it. So my biggest issue right now is that I'm sitting in a space where I'm represented by a male. The male has a disability, you know, because I believe that, you know, substance abuse, alcohol issues are a disability, right? I grew up in a family that has alcohol problems. That's why I was raised by my grandmother named Sarah. That's why I love her, okay? However, even when you have a disability, I do believe sometimes there has to be some accountability, because without accountability, that might not change anything. And I remember as a child, my mother got a DUI, right? Now she didn't stop driving, right? And eventually, as she got older, she stopped drinking, you know? But if we have a sitting council member, who's my council member in this district, who has been on camera and tape, police body-worn camera, being dragged out of a East Point Mall office that is technically a Baltimore County government facility because it's rented for him to work. There is a law on the books that says you cannot have a gun in a government facility. That issue, and we have an excellent police department that de-escalated that. Unfortunately, I think because he was a sitting council member, that was done the right way. But sometimes things could have been a little bit different because we have our own biases. What type of relationship would you have with the police in determining, like, what's something that after you look at it might result in charges? Because we are dealing with people who have substance abuse problems, but, you know, they might commit crimes like domestic violence. So that's a long answer question, but you can not answer it, but just give me your overall thoughts.
So I want to be very clear, because I think a really important thing for a prosecutor is never to make a decision on a case until they've specifically reviewed all of the evidence in the case, until they've done all this. And I'm not going to sit here and question or throw stones at anybody's behavior or a prosecutorial decision that I was not
by the way,
part of.
that was not even given to the state's attorney. So it was so just
I think that the important thing, I'm not going to comment on or discuss any specific cases here. But I think that if your question is sort of, how do we exercise prosecutorial discretion for people, no matter their position, those are the cases that I do professionally. I do political corruption prosecutions. I prosecute elected officials, judges, other prosecutors, as well as, police and other officials. And I think that the important thing is that no matter who the person is, like, both sides are true, right? We need to have the prevention arm, right? We need to have resources available to people that need help, no matter how high profile they are, right? But we also need the accountability arm when that's necessary too. And I think that one of the most important things that I've learned, certainly as a prosecutor of these highly sensitive cases, is that it's really important that, again, it's the same thing that everybody else is treated with. And sometimes that's harder, but it's necessary. And so I think that, what's important is that we should have fair and equal treatment in Baltimore County for anyone, no matter how, what your status is or how much money you have or all of those other things. You should be allocated resources if they can be given to you. And if you do something where there's accountability, that's there too. But we don't want to absolve people of getting resources either, because they're afraid of the scrutiny that would come to them for that.
Well, I'm going to let you have the last word. So when is the election?
Good
How can people follow you? What can they do to support you?
So it would be wonderful to have people engage with our campaign. We're at Sarah for Baltco on Facebook, on Instagram, and all the other social media apparatuses. We are also can be contacted through our website. And I think that the election is June 23rd. And what would be wonderful is to have as many volunteers as possible to come out specifically in this area. We're here in Essex, where one of the highest reports of domestic violence in the county come out of Essex. And so it's really important to engage in this race. It's really important because, as I said, it could affect all of us. All of us could become a victim or a witness on any day. And having someone in that office that cares about the community and cares about engaging with the community is really important. So I'd ask all of you to engage and get involved. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this today.
Absolutely. And I do want to say she's a Democrat. So if you're independent and you want to, support her in this ballot initiative, change your party just for this election, okay? Because it's very important, okay? We all need all the votes you can get. I mean, the last time we had an election and you're going against a long-term incumbent, it gets a little slippery. We can't wait until the general. Okay, thank you. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. And I will have this reposted in a whole bunch of different places so everyone can look at this. This was very informative. And Sarah for a state's attorney. Thank you.
Thank you.